Welcome back to more Warhammer lore. In today's video, we will be delving into once more the Dawizar of Zarnagarund. This time, however, focusing on the army of the Chaos Dwarfs, including their leadership, tactics, and of course units. Now, I do need to preface this with the fact that the Chaos Dwarf roster is fairly old at this point and out of date in my same way that Bretonnia was, in my opinion. Now, I say this as if you are new to the channel, I always like to look at possible future factions within the Total War Warhammer series, and with this in mind. So I'll give you my thoughts on possible changes and commissions I see for the Chaos Dwarfs in Total War. Now, without further ado, let's get into the lore proper. Now, at this point in time, we have established what a Chaos Dwarf is and whom they worship, but what exactly makes them so dangerous when compared to their Western cousins is what we will be answering in this video. Each Chaos Dwarf, in addition to being a craftsman or artificer, is also a highly trained and disciplined warrior, often with scores of years of battle experience to draw upon. This martial skill is matched only by their cruel desire to utterly crush anything that would dare oppose them and grind it under their heel. There are relatively few Chaos Dwarfs, and each and every one of them belongs to one of the Chaos Dwarf sorcerers' body and soul. Chaos Dwarfs are an unnerving sight in battle. They are brutish, grotesque figures, plated in black or burnished armor of heavy plate and jagged scales, crowned with tall helms mounted with the flaying tongue, spiked coronas, or sharpened horns. Their livery is bright and bloody, and their distorted faces, if they are seen at all, are bestial and filled with malice. Their presence is intended to inspire fear in their foes, and they have lost none of their toughness or skill at arms of their Western dwarf cousins. To them, there are few greater pleasures than the bloody sundering of a foe, be it by crushing axe blow or the flesh-shreddering volley of blunderbuss fire. Alongside these warriors, Chaos Dwarf armies make extensive use of their slave force, most notably their Orc, Goblin, and Black Orc slaves, which are often overseen by Hobgoblin overseers. Yet the true might of the Chaos Dwarfs does not come from their rune-edged weapons or black powder rifles, but from the massive war machines that accompany each and every one of their armies. In creation of arms and diabolical engines of destruction, the Chaos Dwarfs of Zarnagarund have no equal in the world, save perhaps for the Skaven of Clan Scryer. Aside, however, from the superficial similarity of their desire to create ever more powerful devices, the approach and means to an end for the Chaos Dwarfs and the Skaven could not be farther apart. Where the Chaos Dwarfs favor craftsmanship and reliability over mere speed of creation, the Skaven care not for such considerations in favor of raw power and getting the device in operation as quickly as possible. However, unpredictable the results, or potentially fatal to the crew. To this end, the Skaven favor the use of the treacherous and potent warp stone in their works, which, while not unknown to the Chaos Dwarfs, they favor the arcane binding of demons through the sorceress lore of Hashut in their most powerful devices instead. The end result can sometimes be no less dangerous to the hellsmith or crewman called upon to direct such a weapon, but to the minds of the Chaos Dwarfs, such calamity that may result will be caused by the result of weakness or ill discipline by the operator, or the will of Hashut, rather than chance volatility or shoddy workmanship. It is rather interesting to think of the Chaos Dwarfs being compared to the Skaven when you do see there are quite a few similarities in mind, and also the lack of empathy for others, and of course, it can never be your fault. It was, the weakness of that other one over there. And so very similar to Skaven in that aspect. And as you can see, the Chaos Dwarfs don't suffer the same issues of their dwindling population as their cousins in the West because of their use of their greenskin slave fodder. Now, it is important to note that all of the greenskin contingent in the Chaos Dwarf army are ridiculously under-equipped, so as to not aid them in betraying their Dawi masters. But you didn't tune in to hear me ramble on, so let's get into the actual units in the Chaos Dwarf roster. It is easiest to start from the top and work our way down, so let's begin with the Lords, or Generals if you prefer. The first, and more than likely the only choice, is the Sorcerer Prophet. Now, I went into relatively great detail on the Sorcerers of the Dawizar in my Hashut video, so for more detailed information, please go back and watch that video, as I don't want to retread too much ground in this video, because it will already be somewhat long for one of my army videos. So the Sorcerer Prophets are the leaders of not only armies but also the Chaos Dwarf civilization, and are extremely potent sorcerers, capable of decimating enemy troops and besting many sorcerers of other races easily. Of course not on par with like elves or Lords of Change, and certainly not any Slan, but humans, greenskins, and beastmen, I could see them winning nearly hands down. But that just might be a personal preference. I might be a little biased. There is not much to say than what I have already previously said, and so let's move on to the next Lord choice in the tabletop, being the Bull Centaur Lord. Now, much like the Chaos Sorcerer, I also went into great detail on Bull Centaurs, and the Bull Centaur Lord is simply a bigger, more zealous Bull Centaur. Nothing too special about him, and I would assume he would probably not even make the cut for Total War in my opinion. If you're going to add in another Lord option for the Chaos Dwarfs besides the obvious Sorcerers, I would much rather see a Warlord of some kind, because even though in the lore Bull Centaurs are just as intelligent as a regular Dawizar, I personally see them as more of a Templar kind of order. Not necessarily one leading an army, but a heavy frontline troop, and in this case, a heavy cavalry contingent. So let's move on to something that is new that I haven't already previously covered, with the heroes of the Chaos Dwarfs, starting off with the Demon Smiths, also known as Hell Workers, or simply Chaos Dwarf Sorcerers, lower sorcerers, are both the priests and artificers of their society, ruling over the desolate empire of Xar-Nagarund with iron-fisted malice. Their lore is terrible and ancient, and involves the study of machines and the mastery of forgecraft, weapon making, and the terrible chaos magics gifted to them by Hashut. Combined, these create terrifying weapons and arcane devices of power and destruction. Demon Smiths are few in number, with perhaps no more than several hundred amongst the whole Chaos Dwarf race, capable of wielding their savagely powerful combination of science and sorcery. They possess no absolute hierarchy or single leader, although form and tradition dictates many layers and ranks of fealty and loyalty amid the great conclave of evil that is Hashut's Demon Smith's priesthood. Each is a power in his own right, controlling sections of the great city of Xar-Nagarund itself, or one of the outer citadels, and each has their own workshops, forges, strongholds, slaves and soldiers who owe fealty directly to them. The strongest voice, however, belongs to the oldest and most powerful, known as the Sorcerer Prophets, as well as to those on whom Hashut's blessings are bestowed. Age and knowledge are respected by them just as much by the dwarfs of the West, but tied up with this is a merciless intolerance for weakness, and favor and respect with them is only maintained through strength, wealth, and sorcerous might, which makes the politics of the priesthood quite deadly at all turns. In battle, the Demon Smiths of Hashut are terrifying and unpredictable opponents. The dark magics are able to draw upon the fires of the earth and transmute the air to ash and choking smoke, as well as fan the flames of hatred in the hearts of their followers. They are each also master artisans of war, and may lend their skill to war machine crews, or themselves bear savage and potent examples to their craft, such as black powder weapons, mighty armor, flasks of burning alchemical oil, demon-bound blades, and ensorcelled weapons. Each, however, must display great caution when they wield their occult power, for each spell they wield could also be their last, much in the same of, all chaotic sorcerers. The Demon Smiths are essentially the wizards of the Chaos Dwarfs, but they also are similar to runesmiths of the regular dwarfs, which makes them an interesting unit for the prospect of Total War. I see them as a decent caster on par with a typical Empire sorcerer, but still able to wade into melee combat and stick around similar to the runesmiths, making them rather unique and a must-have, in my opinion, in the Chaos Dwarf roster. The next Lord choice and tabletop is the Bull Centaur Taurus. I think I'm saying that properly. They are essentially the same as the Lords, but can be taken almost like an Empire Captain. I would assume if I had to make a comparison, or maybe make them more similar to a Gorbel, in that they hit very hard and have a lot of mass, so perhaps that would be a better translation into Total War, as kind of a heavy-hitting, large, just hero. So the next hero is the Infernal Castellan, and they are the captains of the Infernal Guard of Asgaroth. They are known to be cruel and to drill their troops ceaselessly. They wear black shard armor and can carry a one-hand or two-handed weapon, a shield, a pistol, and or a fire glaive. Sometimes they can even carry their legion's battle standard. Now these actually seem more like the Empire captains now that I'm thinking about it, and I'll expect them to function like those, buffing your troops, and more than likely helping train your units and gain experience when not even in combat, plus, as all Chaos Dwarfs should be, an excellent melee fighter, and seeing as how he's also part of the Infernal Guard, I would assume you would have a hefty anti-large bonus, as they are quite similar to the Dwarven Slayers. The next and last unit for the Chaos Dwarfs is the Hobgoblin Khan, which are the lords and rulers of the Hobgoblin tribes of the Eastern Steppes. Occasionally, the spiteful infighting and backstabbing within the ranks of the Hobgoblins will throw up these particularly successful and feared killers, who will rise to prominence and style themselves Khan, taking after the wider nomadic Hobgoblin wolf clans of the Eastern Steppes. These skulking killers can prove useful for marshalling their kin into battle, but should they prove too successful and be seen as an even the remotest threat to the Chaos Dwarf Master's dominance, they will most likely end up impaled over their lord's gatepost as a reminder to the others of the reward of getting ideas above their station. Now, this is our first look at the greenskin contingent in the Dawizar. Now, as far as I know, the Hobgoblins are only found in the Chaos Dwarf roster. They're not actually in the greenskin roster, or at least that is the only place I have seen them. Khans are very similar to the current Goblin big bosses we have in the greenskin roster, so I'd expect them to operate similar and essentially be the assassins for the Chaos Dwarfs. Now, Hobgoblins, if you do not know, are not the same as Goblins. For one, they are about the size of a human, but not as big as an orc, and they are also thin and gangly like normal goblins, and are known to be the most treacherous of the greenskin race, which is saying something, as goblins are known to be quite treacherous on their own. And that is it for the heroes. So let's move on to the Dwarven infantry, starting off with the Chaos Dwarf warriors. Now, Chaos Dwarf warriors are very similar to Dwarven warriors in that they are just the standard Chaos Dwarf troop. Now, they are a quite unnerving sight in battle, as we kind of discussed earlier during our early introduction into the military. It's very similar, but they also serve as almost a catching force. See, the acquisition of slaves is a paramount importance to the Chaos Dwarfs. Their warriors are at the forefront of any major raid to achieve this goal, and most forays they undertake beyond the borders of the Darklands are in furtherance of this, rather than for conquest. Warbands and expeditionary armies of Chaos Dwarfs will often travel hundreds of miles in search of suitable living plunder, and while it is the orcs and goblins of the World's Edge Mountains that most often are subjected to their wrath, realms as far as Kislev and the Border Princes have known to be subjected to such attacks in living memory. The more captives a raid brings back, the more successful it is judged, and the greater prestige and honor is accorded, not only on the raid's leaders, but to each Chaos Dwarf warrior in measure of their station. Only by such vile endeavors can advancement be gained and ambition satiated. Now, I expect the standard Chaos Dwarf warrior to be nearly exactly like Dwarven warriors currently are in Total War. I see them coming with a standard axe and shield and a two-handed variant, either with hammers or axes. It doesn't really matter, as it simply is for the armor piercing, and they should be rather stalwart and formidable fighters on their own, as well as have a relatively high leadership and possibly a smaller troop count than standard dwarfs. But that's not actually in the lore. In the lore, honestly, they might be comparable to Dwarf Warriors. So, it depends on what CA wants to do. The next unit is the Infernal Guard, as it is known. It is almost the most legendary warrior cult within the Chaos Dwarf Empire, having the sworn task of defending the Citadel to the death from any that would assail it, and to carry out the will of the Lords of the Black Fortresses without question. The Infernal Guard's ranks are made up from Chaos Dwarfs to whom some stain of dishonor or failure has been attached, an occurrence which in their unforgiving society can result from merely being close kin to a felled battle commander, knowing defeat under the eyes of a sorcerer prophet, presiding over slaves who have revolted, or a furnace that has exploded through overuse. The humiliation of such dishonor is more than the prideful Chaos Dwarfs can bear, and for them the Infernal Guard offers the solace of death and Hasha's grace, and also anonymity, as upon taking its oath, their names and past kinships are shorn away, and their faces are seared and shut underneath red-hot iron and bronze masks. Only if they achieve great glory are the masks taken off, exposing the scarred and ravaged flesh of the redeemed warrior once again to the world. The Infernal Guard are drilled ceaselessly by their cruel Castilians, and barracked in the burning deeps beneath the Black Fortress. Their lot is to fight an unceasing battle against the horrors that abound in the desolate wastes nearby, a regimen that only the strongest survive. Some of these warriors can also be equipped with the fearsome Fire Glaive, weapons both cunning and brutal. Now, the Infernal Guard are essentially the Chaos Dwarf versions of Slayers, but with a rather big difference in that they still wear armor and they can actually be redeemed without having to die, which makes them excellent at taking down monsters, but also not so susceptible to ranged fire like normal Slayers. A very interesting unit, and I look forward to seeing how CA is actually going to deal with them in Total War, as they have the possibility of being extremely overpowered. The next unit is the Infernal Ironsworn, which are amongst the greatest of the Infernal Guard, efficient and deadly warriors tasked with the duty of safeguarding their commanders during the field of battle. Such is their prestige and prowess in battle that they are often called to serve as bodyguards for the Sorcerer Prophets, which lead the higher echelons of the legions of Asgarath. Now, I see the Ironsworn close to the Iron Breakers of the Dawi. They're still Infernal Guard, so maybe instead of blasting charges, they simply have a bonus to large and still the heavy armor. You could do several different things with them, and once again, I am anxious to see what direction CA actually takes with the Ironsworn. The next unit are the Hobgoblin Cutthroats. While far from the best troops, in fact generally varying wildly between feverish violence and debased cowardice, they are too weak and willed and untrusting, even of each other, to mount any kind of cohesive rebellion, and are so hated by their other races loyalty is assured, after a fashion. The Dwarfs of Zar don't make much of an effort to equip their Hobgoblin troops on the basis they are little more than battle fodder, and can be relied on to largely look after themselves, in other words, pilfer loot from the battlefield and each other. Hobgoblins, given the choice, which they rarely have, favor razor-sharp curved blades, all the better to stab their foes in the back with and watch the blood flow. But if pressed into direct battle, they prefer, whenever possible, to fight from a distance using crude bows, and then to pounce on any unwary or crippled foe. Disrepute and fractious, hobgoblins, like most greenskins, have a tendency to fight amongst themselves, even in the midst of battle. This is a problem, which, given a hobgoblin's propensity for murders, spite, and self-serving cowardice, is only their deep-seated fear of the Chaos Dwarf masters that can enforce them back into some semblance of order. Of all goblin kind, hobgoblins are highly regarded as the most devious, cowardly, treacherous, and outright murderous, and are utterly distrusted even by their own fellow greenskins. These backstabbers and cutthroats habitually go around armed with all manner of manstickas, blades, daggers, and razors, and for every knife they wear openly, it can be wagered there's at least a few more you can't see concealed about their person, just ready to be plunged into an unsuspecting foe's back. Now, these will obviously be similar to the current nasty skulkers of the greenskin roster, and I would think that they would have a similar utility as a quick, cheap flanking unit that, if left unhindered, can easily break an enemy unit with possible bonuses to stealth, similar to stalk, and I would love to kind of see a bonus to flanking, perhaps a higher chance to hit or damage increase, if they could pull that off. Then we have the Goblin Slaves, which are just there as expendable units to tire out the enemy and force them to expend ammunition on a completely useless target. The ultimate meat shield. They in fact have a lot in common with Skaven slaves, and that they are not equipped with anything actually useful as a weapon, and I would expect the same from them as the current goblins in the Greenskins roster. Then we also have Orc slaves. Now these are still used as fodder, but a more sturdy fodder, and I would see them more akin to clan rats of the Skaven. Essentially a low-tier melee unit with terrible leadership, but dangerous if not headed off by actual melee units, as they will tear apart skirmishers and also be pretty good flanking forces. And then finally we have the Black Orc Slaves. Now these guys are heavy hitters if you have ever come across them in Total War. They will cleave through almost any other elite melee unit. Now, if they are kept in the Chaos Dwarf roster, as I see them as a much more effective stopgap for Chaos Dwarf warriors, meaning they shouldn't be anywhere near as powerful as standard Black Orcs from the Greenskin roster, because they shouldn't be as well equipped. but they should have a high leadership and be extremely tough to cut through for a unit that doesn't have any armor piercing. Now, that is all the standard infantry in the Chaos Dwarf roster. Of course, there could always be more, particularly the zealous female Chaos Dwarf bodyguards I spoke of in my Hashut video, and I could see there being even more variants if CA wants to add some more flavor. But I don't think that we will be seeing all of the different types of slaves. I can see the Goblin slaves and maybe even the Orc slaves, but I have my doubts about the Black Orc slaves, as they have a very similar role as the Chaos Dwarf warriors. But at the same time, if CA could put an interesting spin on them, I could see them also being added as well. And now we move on to the Chaos Dwarf skirmishers, and there are not as many as you actually think. And we start off with the mighty Chaos Dwarf Blunderbuss, which is one of the most destructive handheld firearms in the known world. Chaos Dwarfs generally fight with one or two of these weapons, both equally destructive in their own way. The first is the double-headed hand axe, a short-hafted weapon with a heavy metal blade, which can crack open armor and cleave a foe in two. The second is the Blunderbuss, a short-range weapon of devastating effect. The Blunderbuss uses a gunpowder charge to fire shards of spiked iron at the enemy, although it can also fire hot coals, lead shot, pieces of scrap metal, and even stones if need be. The weapon is so robustly made that it can be loaded with far more power and shot than a simple handgun, and its effect is quite different. When a Blunderbuss regiment fires a volley, the whole zone to its front is filled with spinning razor-sharp pieces of iron, which spread out covering a broad front. As the enemies are hit and slain, more slicing metal plows into the ranks behind, causing untold devastation to all foes enforced enough to be close. Blunderbusses have only a very short range, as all the energy of the shot is dispersed over a short distance, but within that range, they are quite deadly. The blunderbuss-armed Chaos Dwarf warriors are also ferocious hand-to-hand fighters. Their preferred tactic is to give their enemy a single blast and follow up by charging into close combat. The blunderbuss warriors should be relatively easy to implement, as they are kind of a combination of quarrelers with great weapons and thunderers. However, the difference being that they should have a very short range and extremely long reload time, probably similar to Iron Drake torpedoes in damage and reload, but with more units, and they can be used in melee similar to the Dawi, as all Chaos Dwarfs units are decent in melee combat. Now, we also have Hobgoblin archers, and honestly these are almost identical to regular Goblin archers. Crap in melee and overall don't do much damage, but they do have volume and can shoot much faster than the blunderbusses. And that is it for the skirmishers, or at least what I deem to be skirmishers. And now we move on to the cavalry, starting off with the Hobgoblin Wolf Riders, which are the fast, swift-moving cavalry forts, which act as scouts and light cavalry in service of the Chaos Dwarfs. These are commonly drawn from the more nomadic Hobgoblin tribes of the east of the Mountains of Morn, and isolated bands which roam the fringes of the southern Darklands. They are lured into service with the Chaos Dwarfs as mercenaries, but their new lords treat them no better than slaves regardless. These raiders, all bandits and robbers by disposition, are if anything even less reliable than their foot-slogging kin, their mounts allowing them to flee with much greater speed when the need arises. This tendency is however outweighed somewhat by their usefulness as skirmishers and foragers, particularly to Chaos Dwarf slave raiding expeditions who must travel far and wide, often in unfamiliar and hostile lands. Wolf Raider units, usually formed by at least 5 warriors led by a wolf boss, are normally armed with light armor and hand weapons and ride on giant wolves. They can also take up shields and or spears or bows. These guys are very similar to the current Goblin Wolf Riders, and I see them as being nearly identical, perhaps maybe giving them more armor and less speed than standard Wolf Riders, since they are bigger and even states that they have light armor, which still makes them not entirely useful unless you need to harass an enemy that can't possibly catch them. Then to finish out the cavalry, we have the Bull Centaurs. Now, I once again have covered this unit in my Hashut video, but if you do not know what a Bull Centaur is, they are essentially a Chaos Dwarf and Bull hybrid, almost like a Centaur of the Beastmen, but much heavier, heavily armored, and either shielded or wielding a two-handed weapon, making them excellent heavy shot cavalry that can even do armor piercing. If CA wanted to add a little flair to them, they could even outfit them with blunderbusses or something similar to thunderers, as they are quite intelligent and should easily be capable of skirmishing before closing in melee, although that might be slightly overpowered, but one can dream, and it is not lore-friendly exactly, but at the same time you could see it happening. So let's move into the war machines now, and the first is quite familiar in the Hell Cannon. It is a massive smoking construct of metal that growls and shakes with demonic sentience. In battle, these arcane engines have crackling blasts of raw energy that soar through the air into their targets, liquefying anything they touch and sending the survivors insane with fear. Hell cannons are guided by a team of corrupt and sadistic chaos dwarfs. These malign warsmiths escort and restrain the hell cannons in battle, for the demons bound within hunger for a banquet of flesh. Such is the hell cannon's bloodlust that it must be chained to the ground to stop it from rampaging towards enemy lines. Even these precautions often prove inadequate, as there is little that they can stay a hell cannon's lust for destruction. The chaos dwarfs loading their charge by brutally shoveling the bodies of their enemies into the hell cannon's dire furnace. Flesh runs like wax as the demon machine's hearth feasts on body and bone. Soon only the sounds of its victims are left, harnessed in the hell cannon's gullet as crackling bolts of energy that are fired towards the enemy in powerful spasms of complete malice. Now, that was a very disturbing sight, and I bet you didn't realize that the hell cannons were actually sentient. So, we currently have hell cannons in game, and I see no reason to change them from the Chaos Dwarf roster. So, perhaps we could get access to an even more powerful cannon, or maybe the demon smiths will be capable of buffing them and making them even more deadlier than the standard cannons with the Chaos Army that we have right now. And the next artillery piece is the Quake Mortar, which are amongst the largest and most effective of all the mighty siege weapons developed by the Chaos Dwarfs. They rank alongside other such mighty bombards and cannon able to rend the earth and smash through layered stone fortifications as if they were kindling. The Dreadquake's deadly projectiles are fired by steam pressure that is generated by a boiler and contained within a pressure vessel, conventional gunpowder being far too dangerous given the volatility of the Dreadquake's unique and powerful shells. As a consequence, it takes quite a while for the machine to generate enough steam to fire a single shot, limiting its potential in battle. But even on the open field, it is a supremely dangerous weapon against large and static targets, and if successfully fired against the enemy infantry, it can wreak carnage, as more than one orc tribe of the World's Edge Mountains has found at their cost. The Dreadquake shells are of a secret construction whose arcana is the sole preserve of the Chaos Dwarf sorcerers and prophets of Hashut. When fired from the Dreadquake, they burst into a roaring, blood-red light, and when they strike the ground, they explode, shattering buildings apart and smashing into the ground like a hammer blow from the gods, bleeding crimson energy from the wounded earth. These shells take the form of metal spheres and are so heavy and unwieldy that an ogre commonly forms part of the machine's crew in order to speed up the loading process. The Dreadquake mortar is devastating to say the least, and I see no reason for it not to be, as it should also have a ridiculously long load time after firing, which would make it obscenely good in siege battles for either defense or even on the attack. And now we move on to the Deathshrieker rocket launchers, which is one of the most diabolical and destructive weapons ever created. For bound up within its munitions are howling malevolent fire spirits harvested from the cinders of Hashut's sacrificial altars, and it is this hellish shrieking of these spirits when loose that gives the weapon its name. The Chaos Dwarfs utilize a number of these different types of gunpowder-driven rocket weapons, ranging from shoulder-fire, chain-dragging harpoons used to bind and bring down lava trolls in the magma caverns deep beneath the mountains, to massive warheads launched on pillars of fire to break enemy fortifications. The packed multiple warheads of the Deathshrieker detonate in the air above the battlefield in a storm of fire. Fire which has its own terrible hunger for life upon which to visit its touch. Screaming, fanged tendrils of flame plunge downwards from the blast and expand their strength, actively seeking out victims. The tormented spirits are far from discerning, though, as whose flesh they might burn, and the Chaos Dwarfs must be cautious, lest their own suffer from the wrathful weapon. In addition to the hellish Deathshrieker rockets, the launchers they use are also capable of firing more conventional demolition rockets if need be. These use densely packed explosive rocket heads with delayed fuses in a strengthened iron tube to channel the blast against a single point. The rockets mount a crown of spikes that drive into a vertical wall and hold it there while it explodes. In this fashion, the rocket can punch through even very dense stone that can make a terrible mess of any large creature that gets in its way. Now, you might say that these should be considered skirmishers, but from the sheer devastation, I think they would classify them as artillery, and I see them being very similar to Trollhammer torpedoes once again, but with a straight firing arc and perhaps more splash damage, as a definitely gonna have armor piercing and an anti-large bonus. And now we move on to the Iron Demon War Engine, which is one of the latest demon engines in the service of the Dawizar. The Chaos Dwarfs possess a mastery of steam technology that far surpasses that of the engineers of the Empire. Their steam-driven devices are used first and foremost in the great mines that pit and scar the ash-strewn plain of Zar, and the deep workings that rill the earth beneath it like worms and rotting fruit. Here they drive great tunneling and crushing machines, their flanks rusty with the blood of slaves that toil to feed them. Beside these, other grand machines hammer and roar night and day. To achieve their mineral wealth, small self-powered steam engines and traction cartridges have been constructed to haul ore in lieu of beasts of burden, such as horses or oxen, which soon perish in the treacherous conditions, and in places where slave labor is impractical or inefficient. The Dwarfs of Zar prefer to place their trust in iron and brass, and in fire and steam rather than muscle and bone. So it was not long before these engines were also deployed due to their obvious merits for hauling cannon, rockets, mortars, and other destructive weapons to the battlefield rather than ore or iron ingots. The driving power behind these engines comes from coal, which the Chaos Dwarfs mine in great quantities beneath the plain of Zar, and they infuse an arcane rite so that it burns hotter and far more consistently than naturally possible. Their furnaces will, however, willingly devour wood or other base material if they happen to be the only available source of fuel with a temporary, acceptable loss in performance. Among the slaves of Zar Nagarun, though, rumors abound of engines that run on blood, ground bones, and screaming spirits, and such ingenuity is certainly not beyond the devious and inventive servants of Hashut. One of the latest designs to see widespread service within the Chaos Dwarf Empire is the Iron Demon, a compact, armored steam-driven traction engine. The steam boilers that provide these machines with motive power to haul heavy armaments and munitions to the battlefield are cunningly designed so they can also be used to work pressure-fed weapons such as cannonades and wall breakers. This means that every Iron Demon is also a very powerful war machine in its own right, a fully mobile artillery piece, a murderous killing engine able to smash through fortifications and hack down ranks of living soldiers with equal ease. However, although the Chaos Dwarfs are skillful and determined artisans, their engines are not yet as sophisticated as to be completely reliable or entirely safe to operate in the anarchic field of battle. Draz Hroth had already met with great success in implementing the use of these deadly and versatile engines within the forces of the Black Fortress when Tamaruk's horde descended from the east. He then swiftly decided, when the bargain with the Chaos Lord was struck, to make these machines the center of his expeditionary force, and was eager to test their performance in traversing the hostile mountains and cities of the west. Particularly, he was keen to see them in battle against the vaunted war machines he knew the Empire was said to possess, and he would not be disappointed. Now, the Iron Demon is essentially a steam tank. Not too dissimilar to the Empire steam tank, but obviously far superior. And in fact, it is has the same attacks, including steam and the cannon blast, which should make it easy to implement in Total War, as it should pretty much just be a reskin. The next and last artillery piece for the Dawizar is the Magma Cannon, which is a fiendish weapon first conceived of for use against the ravening trolls and other unwholesome and hungry monsters that spawn and multiply in the Darklands. The Magma Cannon being somewhat of a cross between a field artillery piece and a furnace, it is designed to spew molten metal and fire upon its victims, horrifically burning them to death. The Magma Cannon has seen long use and been the subject of considerable modification and experimentation by Chaos Dwarf demonsmiths. No two are quite the same, but rather the product of an individual's malign creativity. Some use pressurized steam boilers to jet gouts of burning sulfur, caustic tar, or acids, while others incorporate sorcerily bound volcanic glass shells in which molten lava drawn from the deep earth slumbers until its shell is shattered. Regardless as one of the true works of the demonsmith's craft, neophyte sorcerer engines vie with each other to produce the most deadly magma cannons of their own design. Many have perished as a result of such experimentation, either overcome by choking fumes, dissolved by vapors, acidic vapors at that, or blown to shreds within their volatile mixtures, have been exposed unexpectedly. To their overlords in the priesthood of Hashut, this is only right and proper, as such failure is not tolerated in the service of the Father of Darkness. The Magma Cannon is a relatively short-range but potentially devastating weapon, able to incinerate packed bodies of enemy troops or burn clear defended positions in close assault. Much like many of the previous war engines, this is basically a flame cannon. It serves the same purpose, but it could be interesting if perhaps it had two forms of firing, similar to the new Elven ballistas. one being a shell with longer range and another being a short range but constant cone of fire, similar to the Iron Drakes. That would be pretty interesting if they were to be able to implement that. And we are finally through artillery. The Chaos Dwarfs have very powerful and great artillery, to say the least, but now we shall move on to the monsters and constructs, which are probably my favorites. The first one we will cover is the Kadai, known in the Dark Tongue of the Chaos Dwarfs as the Kadai Zar, which means Scion of Fire or Fireborn. They are mighty demonic fire elementals which serve the demon smiths of the Chaos Dwarf Empire. Chaos Dwarfs are arrogant, malign, and paranoid beings who will bend their knee to none but their father in darkness, Hashut. Their desire of the sorcerers and demon smiths are for power and domination, and for weapons and soldiers that will make them invincible, and it is from the desire that the Kadai Zar, the Scion of Fires, were born. Rather than summon uncontrollable demons as human chaos sorcerers might, or parlay bargains with the greater fiends of chaos, priests of Hashut have long sought to enslave the demons they summon by binding them into weapons and armor, war machines and constructs, thus harnessing and controlling them for the sorcerer's will and giving them form. With the Kadai, they have sought to do something more, to create a race of beings, half demon, stuff and half-raging fire drawn from the magma of the deep earth and birthed in a boiling blood of Hashut's burning sacrifices, given form and contained within an armored framework of artificial iron and rune-stamped bronze. The High Priest of Hashut have succeeded almost too well in the Kadai, for they are almost mindless elemental forces of destruction and need to be laid to rest as cold and silent metal until they are required for battle, when they burn bright and terrible, but only briefly. Only the greatest of the sorcerer prophets is able to forge these monsters of metal and flame, and the process is both costly and arduous in the extreme. This limits their numbers, making them almost the stuff of legend, but with the dark imaginings and limits of deadly craftsmanship, the only end of the terrible forms of Kadai can be fashioned and shaped into. There have been those of Hashut's priesthood who have met their cursed doom early, as the power required to make the glorious visions real has slipped before their very grasp. Now, it is not very specific on how large or small these units are, but for our sake, I am going to say troll size. And I see them as being very quick and heavily armored, and of course doing fire damage. They would function very similar to Minotaurs, I believe, but perhaps with a berserk mechanic, so you would have to utilize them carefully or lose complete control of them until they die, or I guess calm down. And the next and probably best monster in my opinion, ever in a fantasy universe, is the Lamasu, which is a manticore-like chaos creature with the body of a gigantic bull and a powerful mace-tipped tail and a massive ugly head. The Chaos Dwarfs believe that the Lamasu is a rare mutation of the great Taurus, a creature whose forebears were once Chaos Dwarfs, assumed, but which has become twisted by the powers of chaos to a huge bull-shaped monster. The Lamasu's ancestry is evident in its tusked head, its sickly curled beard, and its considerable intelligence. It is a creature with magical properties. It breathes no ordinary air, but the power of magic itself, drawing into itself the power of the winds of magic. As it exhales, the creature breathes out whirling clouds of black sorcery, which wreathe themselves around the Lamasu, and wrapping it with protective power by protecting it from hostile spells. The Lamasu is the favorite mount of the Chaos Dwarf sorcerers. The Lamasu is a wise and crafty beast and makes its lair in the Darklands. The Chaos Dwarfs believe it to be a rare mutation of the Great Taurus, and it is the only acclimated to magic but also lives and breathes the very stuff of sorcery, as we just discussed. Indeed, the Lamasu possesses a minor but potent spell-casting ability, the backwash of which itself it manifests the sorcerer's black clouds of curl about the beast within every time it breathes. The magical exhalation protects the Lamasu from hostile spells. Furthermore, enemies fighting a Lamasu in melee often find these smoky threads of sorcery befouling their magic weapons, dampening their power, and preventing them from striking the beast to full effect, so it actually negates attacks. Now, the Lamasu rarely ever seek to enter battle themselves, at least not as a first resort. A Lamasu would far rather convince other beasts to do their dirty work for them. In stark contrast to its breathtakingly ugly appearance, the Lamasu possesses a peculiar and insidious charisma that it uses to further its own agendas. When reinforced by the Lamasu's magical artifice, this can leave the creature's victims befuddled and suggestible in the span of a few minutes. Great Tauruses, wyverns, Pegasus, griffins, all are susceptible to the Lamasu's honeyed words and cunning manipulations. Only the most maddened and ferocious of monsters can withstand the Lamasu's voice, and then only out of red-forged rage, rather than the conscious resistance. While the Great Taurus is undoubtedly the king of the Plain of Zarduk, it only reigns because the Lamasu is content to let it. Chaos Dwarf sorcerers have used Lamasu as steeds for thousands of years, but who's to say whether it's mount or rider that commands this partnership? Now, the Lamasu is probably one of my favorite Chaos Dwarf units. It has such a colorful backstory and really interesting in that it favors manipulation over outright combat. Now, this should certainly be a mount for sorcerers, but having a single Lamasu as lone monster would be pretty interesting as well, as I think they would have a significant magical resistance and maybe exude an aura that makes enemy monsters have less attacks and defense, as to embody its silvered tongue. Never thought I would be saying that about a monster, but that shows you how awesome the Lamasu is and why it has to be in the game, if I do say so myself. And then we move on to the Great Taurus. The Darklands are a dreaded realm, a haven and birthing ground of all manner of monsters and unnatural creatures, but none are more sought after by the Chaos Dwarfs than the Great Taurus of the volcanic heights. Of the supreme terrors of the crags and craters of ash and fire, some claim the Great Taurus is less a beast than a manifestation of the rage and deathly savagery of the Darklands themselves. To the Chaos Dwarfs, their resemblance both in form and molten fury to the icons of their terrible god Hashut, Father of Darkness, is no mere coincidence. In form, no two Baal Tauruses ever quite look alike, and the mightiest of them truly massive beasts that never die except by violence. All bear the overall semblance of a huge winged demonic bull whose flesh burns with the intensity of a living furnace, sufficient to wreath it in smoke and spark the ground after beneath its hooves, and against which arrows and blades alike perish to cinders and ruin. To many who would consider themselves wise in such things, the burning wrath of the Baal Taurus is little more than a myth, for sustained by the fires of the Darklands, they seldom stray far from their lairs. But those that inhabit the Darklands know better. They fear the ash-trailing shadows that encircle the sky, and then plummet of the Great Taurus like a red-wreathed comet at its prey. An onslaught no mere mortal creature can withstand. None but the highest servants of Hashut and the most powerful of the fire wizards can hope to master these hellish monsters, and the infernal stables of the crimson and bronze Tauruses beneath the great temple of Zar-Nagarund are heated by sacrificial fires kept burning night and day to appease the sacred beasts kept there. Indeed, it is only by means of the most complex and dangerous spells that a Chaos Dwarf sorcerer can ever mount such a dangerous creature without themselves succumbing to their incinerating heat and voracious appetites. As creatures of flame and ash, Great Tauruses cannot stay from the Darklands save for when the winds of magic are at their strongest, for no other part of the world is sufficed by the power that sustains it, the wind of fire, also known as Ashe. Only by carefully channeling of bright magic can a Great Taurus be lured into the old world or beyond, but the beast's raw might more than compensates for the effort involved. Now, the Great Tauruses are obscenely powerful. You might even compare them to a dragon, though probably not a star dragon or moon dragon, but perhaps on par with the sun dragon. It is hard to compare strength, but it is also implied that these might not even be corporeal beings, but they might be demons of Hashut, possibly, as they have the small lore blurb about not being able to leave their lands unless the winds blow strong, in the same fashion as the demons of chaos. Now, I don't think that this is a coincidence, but as far as Total War is concerned, I see them as a mount for your lords, like top tier mount, as well as a single model would be nice and similar to a dragon with the same destructive power. The next monster is the Kadai Destroyers, which are far larger brethren of the Kadai Fireborns, massive constructs created in the form of mighty warriors of iron beasts, such as gargantuan monster bulls and other nightmarish creatures, awakened by mass blood sacrifice and let loose upon the enemy. The High Priest of Hashut have succeeded almost too well in the creation of Kadai's destroyers, as they are nearly mindless elemental forces of destruction, need to be laid to rest in cold and silent metal until they are required in battle, where they burn bright and terrible, but briefly, similar to the regular Kadai. The destroyers are singular constructs, unlike the regular Kadai, which are multiple. Fashioned to the desires and diabolical whims of the demon smiths and sorcerer prophets, they forge them in Hashut's deadly fires. Although all are large and bestial, some may be created in the image of great bulls, another of a rhinox, a dragon, or some other twisted creature conjured up from the dark imagination of its creator. All, however, are beasts of blackened and jagged metal, sufficed with glowing runes of binding, and alive with hellish flame. These things are essentially just massive Kadai. Not much more to say, and I see them, if they are ever added, which I'm doubtful, as being similar to dragons or giants, but Chaos Dwarf's roster already has a lot more interesting and more iconic units, in my opinion, that fill the same role, so I believe that they will probably be pushed to the wayside, but I could be wrong, you never know. And the last and probably the most underrated of the Chaos Dwarf monster roster is the Chaos Dwarf Siege Giant. Now, the Chaos Dwarfs have not been slow to take note of the power and military potential of giants, as they have often encountered them as foes within the ranks of orcs and goblins. Hordes that infest the Darklands and the southern mountains of Morn that border the Empire have long been inhabited by unusually high numbers of these creatures. It is said this is because it was once the home of a great kingdom of giant kind in earlier days, now shattered into ruin and desolation. Those would be the Sky Titans. As a result, Chaos Dwarf sorcerers have long had the idea of burning giants that they were able to capture and or enslave through trickery or trade with ogres under their will, and in doing so have been unable to resist improving upon them in order to make them living weapons. Hence you can see a more Skaven-esque version of what they have done to these poor giants. The most common result of these modifications is the Chaos Siege Giant, a mutated, half-insane creature whose body has been armored against attacks by layer upon layer of heavy iron and bronze plates. These are firmly secured to the unwilling giant by heat fusing, riveting, and nailing them deep into the giant's flesh, and in some cases in bolting them directly into its massive skeleton. The end result is a towering, ironclad monster, even more clumsy and unwieldy than before, but now all but impervious to arrows and shot thanks to its armored shroud. Likewise, suitable weapons such as immense hooked blades, steel pickaxes, and the size of carts, and even massive wood chains, flails, and lash are implemented directly to the giant's arms to enable it to scale or tear down fortifications and slaughter the largest monsters. Some even are further fitted with scaling hooks and chains, enabling the creature's dead carcass to be used as a scaling platform should it fall, while the most unfortunate have the burning runes of Hashut branded into their armor and flesh, driving them to ever greater heights of savagery at their master's command. Not all such improvements prove survivable for the creature forced to undergo them, and so Chaos Siege Giants are scarce and highly prized commodities, both within the Chaos Dwarf Empire and as weapons bartered in trade with the Chaos Dwarf worshipping tribes of the north, who often lack the means or patience to build conventional siege weapons. A living siege engine that merely requires a steady diet of carcasses and spirits is therefore very ideal for them. The Chaos Siege Giant also has some interesting war gear in the Runes of Hate, which essentially make it go berserk and unbreakable, as well as siege armor and the aforementioned scaling spikes. The armor makes it highly missile resistant, and the spikes I could see used as almost like a siege tower. So perhaps if you were sieging a settlement with one of these giants in your roster, you could use them to lumber up to a wall and have your units scramble up them similar to a tower. It would be pretty cool, but I doubt that CA will ever implement it. But there is always that slim chance of hope. It would be hell to animate, of course. And that has been a rather long video, guys. That is it for the Chaos Dwarf Army roster. Now, some closing thoughts before I end the video. The Chaos Dwarf Army is extremely powerful, judging by its components. It has all the strengths of the dwarfs, with none of their weaknesses. They have highly armored and elite infantry, excellent siege equipment, possibly the best in the Warhammer world, maybe rivaled by the Skaven, heavy cavalry, elite monstrous units with heavy armor, and fast light cavalry, and fodder troops to slow down the enemy and weaken a superior numerical army. They have the best of everything, nearly, which is why I think CA will have to do some serious tweaking to either the roster or how well the units perform to make them a more balanced faction. But as we have seen with Bretonnia, Norska, and the Beastmen even, they have a great track record of taking weak and low tier factions in the tabletop and making them competitive and still unique and fun to play. So I have hopes for the future. As always, I would like to say thank you to all my loyal subscribers and my new subscribers. Your support means a lot to me, and as long as you want me to make videos, I will continue to make them for you. Also, if I left something out or made a mistake, be sure to leave it down in the comments section, as I am known to occasionally glaze over a topic or unit, perhaps. And also let me know if you would like me to do a Q&A video on the Chaos Dwarfs, or if you would rather me just hold off and do a more encompassing video in the near future. And if you are new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe to keep in touch with the channel, make sure everything's going on. It also helps it grow and helps more people see these videos. So, as always, I have been Jimbo Thick. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video very soon. Have a good day.